minutes after 9. This is the AM show with me, Bernice, Abu-Baidoo, Lansah. It's now time for us to have a conversation about colleges of education being given quotas for admission by the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, GTEC. And this is beginning in the next academic year. We ask what the implications are for our education system. Our guest, Dr. Peter Anti, Executive Director, IFEST, Institute for Education Studies, I beg your pardon, and Dr. Clement Park, who is ranking member on the Education Committee of Parliament. Good morning to you, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Dr. Park. You have stated that the president must apologize for this U-turn. Why?
Let me say good morning to you and viewers and listeners. Of course, we are on recess, so I am in my constituency as expected. Let me say a good morning to my good friend, in the educational space, Peter. Well, the reason why I have called on the president to apologize to the people of Ghana for what I describe as a sudden U-turn in a campaign promise which was made and indeed was being implemented, yet has been abandoned midstream, is precisely because of the narrative that came from the then NPP in opposition and what they did with regards to the debates about funding education in the area of teachers. And so when you go on to make a promise and you speak down on an earlier policy which, saw the demise of a quota system which restricted access to teacher training, and then you are given the mandate, you come and restore it somewhat, and you decide to introduce the quota system which was abolished to allow for more students who qualified to apply and get spaces to train as teachers. And then you promise that you will not reintroduce the quota system. In place of that, you would allow all qualified applicants to be given opportunities based on the capacity, the facilities available on various colleges of education campuses. So when you say all of these things, and then you come back along the line to reinstate the quota system that you promised you wouldn't, introduce, you could handle that quota system being, obsolete, but at the same time, not restraining admissions, and you do the opposite, clearly you ought to be called out for being dishonest. And that is why I am making that call. And in fact, to quickly add, the justification that we are hearing post the leaked letter from GTEC to the principals of colleges of education really has no basis. I can tell you, and I know Peter can confirm that my own checks with the principals of colleges of education, looking at the figures the year before, 2 years before this coming academic year, clearly indicates that the argument that is now being proffered to suggest that this is being done to address accommodation challenges clearly has no grounds to stand on. But this is not to deny that we have not done well in expanding space on the campuses of the colleges of education. But that is not the principal reason. Government simply cannot afford to continue paying teacher training allowances, feeding fees.
It's interesting that you admit that there are challenges with infrastructure. And in fact, on the news this morning, we showed some of the challenges in the infrastructure of College of Education. So if you say that exists, but you still deny the reason, what exactly is the basis for which you do so?
What I'm saying is that argument is a peripheral argument. I mean, Peter would confirm that the issue of space in many public institutions of higher learning, and even including secondary schools, is not new. Yet, this has never been a reason to impose a quota. That is why that argument falls flat. The challenge has been there, but we know that even just the last admission year, the numbers that these colleges, with these challenges that we are speaking about, admitted, are above and beyond the quota that is being given. And this is also confirmed because my checks indicate that this was purely an imposition by government. The principals of the colleges of education were not consulted. They didn't give an input. I don't want to mention names because, we live in a system where there is a tendency to victimize heads of institutions for divulging information that sometimes government thinks that, can be detrimental or will create disaffection. But my checks indicate that some of those colleges that are being given some of the lower numbers in the previous year admitted twice that number. So what is this argument? We cannot predicate the reintroduction of the quota system on the challenges to do with, with space.
So these abandoned projects, you're deputy ranking member on the Committee of Education. Has it come to your attention? What is being done to ensure that these projects are completed?
Yes, it has come to my attention. As our committee does, we have oversight, and we take our oversight responsibilities very, very seriously. We engage with various stakeholders, and we get to know their needs and their challenges. I have usually gone a few, steps further to engage and bring to the forefront challenges affecting the different tiers of our educational ladder. In the case of the colleges of education, like, the universities and other institutions of academic pursuit, one of the challenges is this inability of GET Fund to meet its commitments. And that is also a product of what I would describe as a bad policy. This government very early on decided to place a cap on GET Fund, reducing substantially and even refusing to allocate the reduced amounts that should be going to GET Fund on the basis of the taxes that we pay and what is supposed to be channeled towards educational infrastructure. And so when you have GET Fund being starved of resources, and you have GET Fund being the principal avenue for, increasing and augmenting educational infrastructure, you cannot expect, some of these projects to come to a standstill. So if we are to address this issue realistically, the option of having to rely on students to pay for this clearly is not available, and I would be opposed to that, even if economic conditions were not this dire. So what ought to be done, as we have been advocating in Parliament, led by the leadership of the Education Committee, is for Parliament to amend the law that, government sought for and was granted by Parliament to cap the revenue streams that go to what we call earmarked funds. If we are able to decap GET Fund and GET Fund gets its maximum allocations annually, I believe that GET Fund will be able to provide the needed funds to complete many of these uncompleted projects and even add more. So if we are looking at the medium to long term, this is the more sustainable way to go.
Do you agree that the reasons being given by GTEC for the reintroduction of this quota system are not convincing?
Yes, simply put, the reasons being proffered by GTEC are not convincing. I can tell you for a fact that it is no secret that government has struggled to pay teacher trainee allowance and feeding fees. I mean, this is a fact. I mean, a couple of months ago, the principals of the colleges of education had decided that based on government's inability to meet its commitments timeously, government should give them permission to allow the students to fend for themselves. I remember some of us had to make interventions. Thereafter, government they released some, I believe, 60 million Ghana cedis, which was a drop in the ocean. So the record is there. The truth is that government is really struggling to meet its commitment. So rather than trying to, find an excuse under the cloak of inadequate space, government ought to be sincere and admit the challenge. And perhaps it is time for us to look at the alternative, which was what existed before the NPP Akufo-Addo government took over power and decided to reinstate the teacher trainee allowance.
Pak, I'll have you hold on at this point. Dr. Peter Anti, do you agree with him that these reasons being offered by GTEC are not convincing?
Yes, of course, I agree with him. From 2012, we decided to convert our training colleges to colleges of education. We had 6 years to run the first 4-year program. In fact, in the year that we introduced the 4-year program, principals of the colleges complained bitterly about the infrastructure available to contain the 4-year program. But yet, because we were determined to do that, we went ahead to do that. We didn't say that we are running the 4-year program at this time. You don't have space, so you have to take this number of students. The following year, we allowed them to admit more students. Then by this year, in 2021, we have had almost the entire campus filled with 4-year students on campus. In all these instances that I have cited, we did not ask them to strictly abide by a number of students that they should admit. Again, as early as last year, before the admissions, principals complained about accommodation infrastructure on campuses. We didn't hear GTEC talking about then you should reduce the number of students that you are supposed to admit. More importantly, we have been in this country where the authorities have felt that there is a need to open space for people to access education and therefore introduce what we call the double track. We did not talk about the lack of infrastructure in the secondary school level. What we did was to just innovate and come out with something that would allow everybody to access education. So if we are at the tertiary level, where even they are more matured and there are options, there might be options that we can implement to ensure that those who would want to access teacher education are not denied the opportunity to do so. And we are being told that these measures are being taken because of accommodation or infrastructure. The first question, when did we realize that that was the case? The second question is that we have been doing this thing. We have converted these colleges to 3 years, from 3 years to 4 years for all this while. Why haven't we did the needed kind of infrastructure expansion to accommodate the numbers that are coming? Again, I've heard that they are saying, I read online that there's the notion that the quota system is not the quota system, but rather it is supposed to control the number of teachers that we are having, because there are teachers outside that have not been employed by GES. And I feel that this is also not a good excuse, because we have teachers that graduate from the universities every year. That did not prevent us from admitting people as students at the colleges of education. And in any case, we do not have teacher oversupply. If you look at the data from MS, you will note that although we at the primary level, we are having about 1 to 35, 38 students to a teacher, at various districts and at various places, at various basic schools, we are having 1 to 70, 80, 90, sometimes 100 students being handled by one teacher. In fact, in some of these basic schools, you go there and there are only about 3 teachers handling from class 1 to JHS. So there is no point in indicating that teachers are oversupplied in the country, and therefore you want to introduce the quota system. Another point is that if you want to do that, then you have to also look at the subjects that are oversupplied. This directive is just an open directive. It didn't say that do not admit students who are pursuing maths, do not admit students who are pursuing English, because we have a lot of them already on the field, so that you shift your attention to students who are pursuing vocational skills or students who are pursuing physical education. That is not what the directive says. The directive says that do not admit more than this number. And if you do, remember that when you are paying your allowance, we will use this number to pay the allowance. So that gives a clear indication, the reason why you are introducing the quota system. And that is because you don't have money to pay for the number of students that would be admitted by the principals. And therefore, you would have to cut down on it and budget according to the money that you have already allocated for it in your budget.
So, Dr. Anti, this is not the only issue GTEC has released a directive on. The other has to do with the fees of tertiary education. And GTEC has warned institutions strongly not to go beyond the 15% that it has stated as the increase in fees. Don't increase fees beyond 15%. GTEC warns tertiary schools. Well, the National Union of Ghana Students, NUS, is unhappy with what it refers to as the blatant disregard of this approved 15% maximum increase in university fees for the 2022-2023 academic year. We heard earlier on the AM News from its president, who cited Legon, KNUST, and the University of Education as examples. We appreciate the times that are hard, and so institutions need more money to run. We are yet to hear from the institutions on why this is happening. Thankfully, we would have Professor Wandari join us. He's with Legon, and we'll be hearing what he has to say in response to this. But let me start with you first, Mr. Apak. Have you done your checks personally? We've done our checks here, but have you done your checks? And what are you picking on the ground with regards to the increment of fees and what the students have to pay at the long run?
Hello, is it for me?
Hi, Dr. Clement Apak. Yes, that's for you.
Well, yes. Quite honestly, we have had an engagement with the leadership of the student movement. I know that they came to meet the Senate committee. We discussed a number of issues, and one topical issue had to do with a complaint that they had filed to the committee to the effect that some of the universities had even started charging fees in excess of what students ought to pay without even waiting for Parliament's approval. And I remember we had indicated to them that we will do our checks. We would get in touch with GTEC, and we would cause a clarification to be made. It was subsequent to that GTEC then issued the instruction to the various universities, informing them that as per the Act, they cannot increase the fees beyond 15% of its original value. So as far as Parliament is concerned, it is our expectation that the institutions would abide by what the law says. And so the students are right when they publicly complain and are seeking redress through GTEC, and I believe ultimately from Parliament, to address the fact that some universities have failed to abide by what is lawful. I can understand the challenges that the universities face. I mean, not long ago I was a lecturer, and I know a thing or two about university governance. The challenges they face are also products of policy inconsistencies and failure by central government to meet its commitments. There are several examples that we can cite where the Ministry of Finance has failed to release, funding to the institutions, or has released amounts that are not sufficient. And again, with the challenges that GetFund is facing, the universities are now in a bigger bind in terms of even augmenting, renovating, and improving academic infrastructure and other user facilities. So the universities feel that they are unable to dispense their responsibility on the back of the lawfully mandated 15% increase. But they don't have the power, and that is where the emphasis must be. They don't have the authority to, on their own, defy what is lawful. If they feel that the 15% clearly is not sufficient to meet, their need, then they know the processes and the procedures to follow. As far as it remains the case that the approval given is 15%, as indicated in the communication to the universities by GTEC, we expect the universities to respect that. And if they don't, there ought to be some sanctions by GTEC. And if that fails, ultimately, I think that Parliament would have to step in.
Right. Dr. Anti, I'll come to you for your response on this issue. But let me welcome Professor Gordon Awandare, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs at the University of Ghana. Good morning to you, Prof.
Good morning.
NUGS is concerned, some of your students are concerned that you're not adhering to the 15% threshold set by GTEC. What's the school's side of the story?
Well, good morning to you, and Merry Christmas to you and to my brother, Honorable Apak, and everybody who's on the panel this morning. So I think that for the University of Ghana, we have adhered to the 15%. We had already been charging fees that were below the approved rate for the last 2 years. So in 2019, Parliament approved a fee increase, but the University of Ghana at the time decided that because COVID had just started in early 2020, the management at the time decided not to implement the new fees in order not to increase the hardship on the students and parents. So we maintained our fees up until this year, when everybody realizes that the cost of everything started to spiral. And so we had to go back and implement the 2019 rate just towards the end of our last semester. Then a few months later, the government then approved a new 15% increase on the previous approval. So then University of Ghana, this time we did not defer the implementation. We went ahead and readjusted the rate accordingly. And so some students are misinterpreting that to say that we are increasing the academic facility user fee at a rate higher than what was approved, but that's not the case.
Prof, if I get you, sorry to interject, Prof, if I get you clearly, the 2019 fees you withheld because of COVID, you decided to implement it before government approved this 15%.
Correct.
So the 15% is on the 2019 fees that the students were not given.
Exactly.
And so that's why it appears. So what they're doing, their calculation with the previous fees, which you say was not what they were supposed to be paying anyway.
Exactly. So you get it. So that's exactly what it is. And so I think that if the students really sat down with the students' accounts officer and went through the numbers, they realized that nothing is untoward at all, and that we actually have been subsidizing them for the last 2 years. And we think that given the current cost of everything, we cannot continue to subsidize. So we had to bring our fees to par, with all what other universities have been charging.
Right, Prof. So how are these decisions communicated to the student body? So I'm just imagining that if the students were aware that, look, in 2019 we were going to increase your fees, but we had to subsidize it because of COVID. And then right before this 15% increment, if they were aware that they were now going to pay some more fees prior to this 15% increment, which was done with that particular fees calculation, then there wouldn't be a need for them to complain. How are these things communicated to them?
Well, first, let's be clear that in the University of Ghana, fee increases go through a process, go through several committees, and students are represented in all these committees. Okay, so the SRC president, GRASAC president, they're on all these committees, up to council. At the University Council, the SRC president is there, and the GRASAC president is there. And all these things go through this process, and the students are represented. Okay, and then after council settled on the fee, the registrar wrote a release and basically said exactly what I've said, that we are implementing the 2019 fee, and that students should know that if government approves any further increase on the 2019, we would go ahead and make the adjustment. The statement is there.
Okay, so for you, this is much ado about nothing.
Yeah, I think the student leaders just need to get together with our finance folks and go through the numbers. There's nothing wrong. In fact, our crime is that we have been subsidizing the students for 2 years. That's our crime. That's what's causing this confusion.
Yeah, Prof, still on the fees bit, will this still be enough for the school to run, considering inflation, cost, which has generally affected every other sector in this country?
No.
Will the university be able to survive on this 15% increment that GTech has approved?
No, we would not. So, in fact, one of the main discussions we're having now is finding alternative sources of income for the university and trying to increase our other sources of income, because the fees alone would not be enough. The fees alone would only cover about 30 to 40% of the cost of running the university. And government comes in with another, 40% or so. And then the rest, we need to cover that gap.
What would have been the realistic percentage increase for you to run as well as you'd want to?
Well, I think that the minimum of maybe 100% would be required to even just allow the universities to operate. Just to stay away from debt. Many universities borrow money just to stay afloat, and it's unsustainable if universities keep borrowing money and interest accruing, and then it's like a cycle. You never get out of it. If you're spending more than you're getting, it's not sustainable. Okay, so I think we need to have a broader discussion about how we finance our tertiary education. Obviously, it makes sense that we try to subsidize it so that everybody can afford. But the reality is that the costs are there, and the money has to come from somewhere. So we have to be really honest with ourselves and have this discussion, so that we don't get to a point where the universities are collapsing. I mean, if you go to many of the public universities, the buildings are in serious need of major repairs. But those cannot be undertaken because we are basically going from hand to mouth, as they normally say. There's no money to do any serious infrastructure development. And like the Honorable MP has mentioned, over the last few years, Get Fund has not been able to support infrastructure development. So it means that all the projects are stalled, and we just survive it, and it's not sustainable.
I appreciate your time here this morning, Prof. Professor Gordon Awandare is Pro-VC Academic and Students Affairs at the University of Ghana. So we're quickly wrapping up this conversation. Let me come to you for your quick thoughts on this particular issue, Mr. Anti, Dr. Anti. Clearly, Prof says, look, even this 15% is not enough for us. We can't survive on this. We will need more. And he shares the struggles of universities with us. Your quick thoughts as we wrap up the conversation.
Him with the issue about a broader conversation on how we finance our tertiary institutions, especially the public universities, because if you look at the kind of work that they need to do on campus in terms of provision of lecture rooms and all the other facilities that needs to be provided, and coupled with the fact that mostly government subvention do not normally come in time, you would have to agree with him that we need a broader conversation. And I think that his explanation makes sense. It makes sense that they decided to absorb some of the fees, and when they decided to now bring it back, 15% has already been added, and they had to add. But what I think they needed to have done was to put this in the public domain, you see, because all this while we have been told by the students that their fees have increased. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to ask the leadership of the students union to go back and do some of the checks, because some of the figures that they were quoting, I was a little bit skeptical about. So I was advocating that they should go back and look at the figures again. And truly, the Pro-VC have confirmed my fears that there was something that was there, and when they decided to introduce it, the 15% also came. I think the best thing to do is to now open up the conversation and then communicate this to the broader student authority. I also want to say that the students' union leaders should always put their ears on the ground, because admission letters were issued somewhere September, October. Some of them have paid the fees already. So if you wait till the last minute of the closing of payment for fees for admission next year, because students are going, I think, first week in January, and you put up this defense, it scatters the students, because they are now torn into in between whether they should pay or they shouldn't pay. But if you were able to now do this background thing somewhere September, October, it would have been easier for you to maybe influence the policy, the position of the public universities. And I am not surprised that GTech have released a statement and the universities are still quiet, because they feel that they have not done anything untoward.
Would you say, as with the case with electricity and other services that we benefit from, it's usually said we don't pay the right amount for these services, and so we are always struggling to keep up. Institutions are struggling to keep up and give us the quality that we deserve. If you look at the gap between what private universities charge and what public universities charge, it's such a yawning gap. And would you say this is time for us to really accept that some of these things need to be looked at and we need to adjust and maybe think about paying a little more to help these institutions run?
I think that financing tertiary education is something that we really need to look at, because you see, even within the government policy framework, according to the Minister of Education, we want to have a 40% tertiary enrollment ratio. And one of the biggest barriers to this, to the achievement of this, is finance, and the other one is infrastructure. But finance plays a critical role in that. So we need to have a broader conversation on this, because we have to balance we have to find a balance between creating access to or enabling people to access tertiary education, at the same time making sure that the universities or the tertiary institutions have the requisite kind of resources that they need in order that they will be able to train the students to be very productive to the society that they live in. So we need to have that kind of broader conversation. I think that one of the biggest ways that we could have even done this is to look at the student loan critically, because one, it delays. Sometimes they don't pay, and when the students need it, like this, for example, students need money to pay their fees. So the students will need the loan right 2 weeks to reopening and then 2 weeks after reopening. The loans normally come after the semester has ended. The students would not have had the money to even register for the courses, and most of them would drop out. So if we have a very potent financial support system, these challenges will not have occurred, because of course the universities would increase the fees to be able to cover all that they are supposed to do, and then there will be a financial support system to support those who are not able to raise the money to register for their semester courses. So we need to have that broader kind of conversation. And I throw this challenge to the student union leaders that they should take a critical look at the student loan trust fund, the disbursements, the efficiency, and everything around this loan system is not helping students who really need the kind of assistance that we are talking about.
Right, I'm grateful for your time. Let me take the last comment from Dr. Clement Opak. Doc, what's the way forward now?
Well, I think that by and large, I agree with my fellow panelists. What they have said, these are the truths. And we have to confront the situations that we face. But clearly, government has a much bigger responsibility in as far as education is concerned. You must recognize that some of us even feel that the funding for education is below, and in fact, it is below the UNESCO standard, where it says that at least the minimum, the lower threshold of the national budget that should go to education should be about 16%. We are nowhere close that. As of this budget for next year, I think we are hovering around 12%. And even so, as has been rightly stated by Prof. and also stated by Dr. Antti, the disbursements are not going. And so this is putting a lot of pressure on public educational institutions, particularly at the tertiary level. And it's very, very worrisome because, we cannot be focused on the middle of the ladder, which is secondary education. Even there, we still have challenges, although secondary has tended to receive the biggest chunk of funding since this government took over the reins of power, to the neglect of basic and tertiary. Because I've argued that it is the basic that has to feed into a secondary, and the secondary is not the terminal stage. So with all the numbers that we are churning out from the secondary level, they ought to go somewhere else, and that is tertiary. But it looks as though, the government has not invested the way it should at the tertiary level to address these issues that many of us anticipated, including the Asantehene Osei-Tutu. I remember fully well when he made the call on government to very quickly look at what needs to be done at the tertiary level in anticipation of the numbers that were going to come out of the free snare school policy. It doesn't look like, that advice, as was the case from others in the educational space, has been given the due attention by government. But immediately, one of the things that can be done, I'll emphasize again, is to decap GetFund. If this is done, clearly the universities would get some reprieve as far as facilities are concerned. And if that were to be happening regularly, I think that would also then influence how much the universities would need to be able to run efficiently.
Thank you so much for your time here this morning. Dr. Clement Opak is Deputy Ranking Member on the Education Committee in Parliament. You're still watching the AM show. We'll be getting interactive with you shortly. But before that, the Ghana Revenue Authority wishes to inform the public that persons wishing to apply for tax clearance certificates should do so online or download the Taxpayers app on Google Play Store or App Store. That's the Ghana Taxpayers app. Applicants who visit the taxpayer service centers will be assisted by officers of the authority to apply. They are also required to indicate the taxpayer identification number, TIN, of the institution or organization on requesting the certificate so that they can receive a copy. Applicants should take note and be guided accordingly. Kindly contact GRA's toll-free 0800 900 110 or via these WhatsApp numbers 055 299 0000 or 020 063 1664, or you can send an email for further enquiries. We'll get interactive with you right after this.